thank you so much for giving your time and coming down here. Can you provide us a brief overview of your experience, your expertise, and your design perspective?
So yeah, welcome here to the Polestar space here in Abu Dhabi. I think we're very proud to have all this behind us here. As it comes to me, I have started my career I studied in Austria, and then I started and London, and then I did a couple of years at the Volkswagen Group, actually quite many years. Then I took over as head of exterior design at Volvo Cars in Sweden, and that's when Volvo decided to create a new electric performance company, which is called Polestar, and now I'm head of design for that company.
Okay. What is the most attractive thing about the automotive design community?
Well, in the beginning, we were a quite tight-knit little community. I mean, it sounds funny because it's a huge industry, but you don't need so many designers. So we always went to the same events, we had our parties, and it was very intimate. And now suddenly there is such an expansion of new brands out there. There's so many new electric brands, especially in the Chinese market, that there are more and more designers. So the whole thing is inflating quite a lot, which is very vibrant, very exciting. But it's not what it used to be anymore. But we'll see.
What is the main responsibility, and I want you to explain that in depth, being an automotive designer and kind of structure, discipline that you have to follow?
So automobiles, cars, are extremely complex products. I think the car is the most industrially produced product. It's thousands and thousands of parts, just the visible parts alone, that all have to be designed, but not just from an aesthetic point of view, but it has to be ergonomically correct, there has to be acceleration, deceleration, crash, all of these things that have to be taken into account. And then there's tons of legal requirements for cars, much more than on any consumer product in general, because of all the dynamic stresses that are on a vehicle. So we are quite confined to a tight framework of what we can do, and being creative within that is definitely the most challenging part of our job. But for us as a brand, and for me personally, I really like to see the role of an automotive designer also as a more responsible role, since we can make pretty much anything desirable as designers. We train for decades in order to be able to attract people and to make a couple of tons of steel, glass and plastic really desirable. But that comes with the responsibility of deploying that power on the right things. So we are very much looking into sustainability, into new methods and processes, new materials. And then my personal aim is to turn these things that are much better for society, for the climate, into desirable products.
Can you explain in detail more, as a designer, what awakens you or inspires you to come up with fantastic designs?
I think that has shifted as well a little bit for me now, from the sheer fascination of the car as a creature, as a character itself, to the mission to turn sustainable materials and sustainable components into that kind of creature that evokes emotion. I think that's been the journey that I've been on recently.
Coming to the cars behind us, can you tell me what was the creative process in designing this fantastic model?
We are a performance brand coming out of Volvo. That was our foundation, and that's also the company that first created Polestar. And the task here was to create a brand that is very premium and very performance oriented and purely electric. And we've been on a journey now from the number one, which is already sold out. It was more or less a collector's item, like as a halo product, now to the two which we have on the market, and now all the cars you see behind me, up to the Polestar 6, which will come in 2026, which is right behind me here, another electric sports car. And we have been designing all these cars in the last 5 to 7 years in parallel as a fairly small team. So that was super much focus and energy going into that.
What are some of the unique elements, interior elements of the car?
Interior becomes more and more a focal point because of electrification. And that's a weird connection you have to make, because electrification is a powertrain. But what it allows us to do is go for a flat floor, move the wheels apart, create more space for interior components. And the next step, which the whole industry is on, and we are as well, is autonomy, autonomous drive, which will also turn interior into a space where you live rather than you focus on the one thing, on driving. So beyond the fact that we have more space to play with, we see more and more comfort features coming into interiors, like reclinable seats in the second row, really a lounge environment. Light is a super important thing. We work with direct light, indirect light, light through surfaces, to create an atmosphere, an enjoyable atmosphere while you're either being driven or while you are in certain stretches being driven autonomously. And then the next big step, which for us designers is really exciting, we're looking forward to that, is when we're reaching full autonomy, when there will be, it's called level 5, which is when you won't even need a steering wheel anymore. And when that happens, all the laws that I talked about earlier, they will basically go out of the window, because all the sight lines and ergonomic demands will not be relevant anymore, and then you can really transform car interiors into living rooms basically on wheels.
Are there any particular challenges that you faced while you were designing and coming up with ideas, and then you were like, no? So if you can name a few of them.
Because it's such a complex topic, car design in general is if you want to be on top, if you really want to challenge, it's always a struggle, because there's certain inertia in the system always. And if you want to do something new, if you want to innovate, you need to push. We have our own engineers in our design team who are like our advocates towards general engineering, and they will help us to push for things. But I think for us, the biggest challenge now is to scale up sustainable materials into the supplier base, into mass production, because they're generally less tested, because they're new, they're more expensive. We know we want them, but in order to get those things into a bigger scale of production, you need to move the big tanker of the whole supply chain into that direction. And that is, I think, for us, the biggest struggle.
Can you shed a light on the different materials and, for example, leather, or whatever comes in your mind, the different materials that you've used in making this model up?
Yeah, I have a couple of good examples. Like, for example, if you think vegan interiors, it's been a buzzword, like, oh, these cars have vegan interiors. The first thing that comes to mind is like, oh, we're not using leather anymore. And people generally like that. The ones that are vegans themselves, maybe, they like that. But then if you go one step further, you realize, wait a minute, that means that the material is made of plastic? And then the answer is yes. So vegan interiors are made of, PU or PVC, vinyl, it's plastics. So what we said then is, how can we turn that material, that's a very pleasant to touch and to feel, into something more sustainable? So together with the suppliers, we changed the fossil component in plastic, crude oil, into pine oil from pine trees. So the material still feels and looks the same, but it's much more sustainable. That's one. The other one is, everybody in the performance car industry loves carbon fiber. Carbon fiber is very light, like it's these very, very strong fibers in a composite that makes it very light and extremely stiff. What we did in our cars, and started it with the Polestar Precept concept in a very extensive way, is changing that to flax fiber. So flax is like linen, garments, it's the same material. And then we turn that into a composite, like carbon fiber, so it's a little bit heavier, not maybe quite as super rigid, but it's very, very close, and 40% lighter than general plastics, but it's bio-based. So that's another good example. And then maybe I should mention leather, because we still offer leather in our products, because leather actually is quite a sustainable material if you are generally into eating meat. Then it's a byproduct of that industry. So in our, you know, by choice you can choose leather interiors. But then we are working with suppliers that are making sure that their farms are animal welfare certified. So there are 5 freedoms that these animals must have in their lifetime that ensure a better life for them.
Lastly, you know, you've emphasized on sustainability, and you know sustainability is such a big term, and the automobile industry is moving towards that. So as a designer, where do you see the industry in the next 5 years?
That's a big question. We don't have a choice, really. If you dig into the topic, we don't have a choice than to go in that direction. Everybody's talking about it. I think people are starting to wrap their head around the topic. And I still think we as an industry, we don't do a great job in communicating, like being pedagogic about, you know, what is a ton of CO2? How does it look like? I mean, obviously it's, you know, what are we talking about? We're talking about these metrics, but we're not very good in explaining these things. So this is part of our task, and we are very tangible when it comes to sustainability at Polestar. We're very good at explaining what we do and what it actually means. And I think that is one of the big tasks of our industry. The next thing, which is not really connected, well, maybe I should start differently. The second big thing is autonomous drive. We've seen, you know, the industry has talked about it, it's been pushed out more because it's so complex to get to the fringe cases when everything needs to be 100% secured. But that will be the next frontier. And then for me, even beyond that comes circularity. And that, you might think, wait a minute, isn't circularity kind of the same thing as sustainability? But it's one thing is about, we're talking CO2, right? It's about not exceeding our CO2 emission targets, so not to heat up the planet in a bad way. That's one thing. But the second thing is to not take so much out of the planet that we could never give back, because we are growing as a population, and at some point the resources will be exhausted. We know that. So circularity means whatever we take out, we keep it in the loop, and we don't take more out of the planet. The planet will be exhausted. But that's an even bigger challenge, to go from virgin stuff to constantly recycled stuff. We're doing some things in terms of monomaterials, which means the same material can be, like lots of an interior is made from one material, so it can all be indefinitely recycled. That's a very exciting project, and it's a really exciting process. But that is going to be the next frontier after that.